By 1940, Japan's 3-year war in China had evolved into a quagmire. The Chinese Nationalist Army, under Chiang Kai-shek, had retreated into the far southwestern regions of China. Communist forces, under Mao Zedong, were united with nationalists to repeal the common enemy. Through China's back door, its border with Burma, badly needed supplies were reaching the country's defenders. Japan badly needed additional resources to continue its conquest. With over 1.5 million troops already committed to the China incident, Japan's manpower reserves were limited. Logistically, Japan's dependence on foreign sources for much of its natural resources was an issue too. With so much at stake both internationally and internally, retreating from China was never a serious option for Japan's military leaders. Some leaders viewed Russia as an easy target for an attack from the east, since that country was involved in fighting German forces along its western border. However, the vastness of the region and its limited supply of much-needed natural resources could make such a move another China. However, with Europe ablaze, colonies in France, Great Britain, and the Netherlands in Southeast Asia were especially vulnerable to seizure. The Dutch East Indies, Malaya, Hong Kong, and Indochina offered vast quantities of badly needed oil and iron ore. For at least 3 years, the United States had been at odds with Japan over its invasion of China. In 1938, it embargoed armament sales to Japan. That was followed in 1940 with an embargo on the iron scrap Japan needed to make steel. Then, in what was perhaps the most vital measure just short of war in the summer of 1941, the United States halted sales of oil and other petroleum products to Japan and froze its assets. Further threatening Japan's plans for expansion throughout the region was the formidable U.S. military presence in the Philippine Islands. Then the United States upped the ante when in the summer of 1940 it relocated its Pacific Fleet from San Diego, California to Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii. Japan was feeling threatened and stymied in its efforts to be the dominant Asian power. Since Japan's military leaders considered war with the United States inevitable, it began planning for an attack at Pearl Harbor even while diplomatic efforts for a peaceful solution were ongoing. Japanese Navy Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto commenced planning as early as the spring of 1941. Final approval from Emperor Hirohito came on November 5th. Accordingly, Japan's Navy assembled a task force consisting of its 6 aircraft carriers and numerous supporting vessels in the Kuril Islands. The task force sailed for Hawaii on November 26th. It arrived north of Oahu undetected on December 6th. Just after dawn the next morning, the first of more than 350 Japanese aircraft launched from the carriers. The first Japanese aircraft appeared over Oahu at 7:48 a.m. Since it was a Sunday morning, the members of the fleet were taking a normal day off. Many sailors slept late, were on liberty, attending church services, or preparing for a day of recreation. Many thought the incoming planes were conducting a drill and paid little attention to them. Until the explosions began. The results of the sneak attack were devastating. Over 2,000 sailors were killed outright, with nearly 1,200 lost on the battleship Arizona alone. Over 200 soldiers and airmen were killed, along with 110 Marines. 60 civilians died in the attacks. Over 1,100 men were wounded. Of the 8 U.S. battleships at anchor in Pearl Harbor, 4 were sunk and the other 4 badly damaged. Another 12 capital ships were damaged, some severely. Of the 400 military aircraft stationed on Oahu, 188 were completely destroyed and another 150 damaged. Only 8 U.S. aircraft were able to get airborne, shooting down but 6 enemy planes. Pearl Harbor wasn't the main focus of Japanese offensive action in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Japanese leaders had made two decisions regarding these actions. The first was a strategic decision, to eliminate the American threat in the Philippines and meanwhile advance south to the economic resource areas defended by the British in Malaya and the Netherlands Indies. The second was an operational decision to attack the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. Disabling the American fleet would enable the main offensive actions in Malaya and Netherlands Indies. Maudsley described this campaign as one of the most complex of World War II. It involved major simultaneous operations against Malaya and the Philippines in the first weeks of the war, and a second wave against Netherlands Indies and Burma beginning mid-January. Unlike the total surprise of the attacks on the United States at Pearl Harbor and Luzon, the British had anticipated Japan's southern strategy to gain natural resources. Britain ordered naval ships the Repulse and the Prince of Wales to the Far East in October 1941. They arrived in December and were promptly sunk by Japanese torpedo bombers in their first engagement. The Prince of Wales was a brand new, fast ship and a serious loss. Maudsley calls the loss the British Pearl Harbor. General Douglas MacArthur had been recalled to active duty and placed in command of the Philippines. The U.S. Army had long recognized the islands as indefensible, and they had very limited U.S. naval presence, with only a few surface ships. MacArthur was in command of a mixed force of both American and Filipino troops, and concentrated defense on the northern island of Luzon. The Japanese attacked Luzon on December 8. Fighting on Luzon was over by January 1942. Remaining U.S. and Filipino defenders retreated from Luzon to the Bataan Peninsula and the island of Corridor. Given the declining situation in the Pacific, MacArthur was ordered by President Roosevelt to leave the Philippines in March. Major General Jonathan Wainwright assumed command. Bataan fell in April. 12,000 Americans and 66,000 Filipinos surrendered, the largest mass surrender in American history. The Japanese military took Southeast Asia in 5 months, despite several weaknesses. The Japanese had only a few divisions to dedicate to Southeast Asia, compared to 30 left in China and 15 on the Russian border, between December 1941 and May 1942. In less than 6 months, Japan attacked America and took control of much of Southeast Asia. What did they gain? Their southern strategy to gain access to natural resources was successful. They demonstrated the skill of the Japanese military in planning and executing a complex military operation. In Burma, Japan could throttle supplies going into China on the Burma Road. And in Singapore, it gained the strategic naval location known as the Gibraltar of Asia. Japanese success was a blow to Western and particularly British prestige. Churchill called the loss of Singapore his greatest defeat. And the myth of the Japanese as second-class racial inferiors was finally put to rest.